In this video, I'm going to answer the question whether a filmmaker needs a telephoto lens, specifically the new 70-200mm f4 version 2 from Sony. Sure, if you're a portrait photographer, you're going to need a lens like this one, while documentary and run-and-gun filmmakers typically use a wider lens so they can catch whatever's coming at them. Now, if you shoot sports or wildlife, of course you're going to need a telephoto lens. But if you shoot narrative films like I do, well, I haven't really seen the need until this lens. In this video, I'm going to go over the 3 reasons why I purchased this lens, and I'm going to see if it met those expectations. I'm also going to talk about some features that I didn't even know that this had that I'm pretty pleased with, and a couple that I'm not. Okay, my first reason is obvious. It's for the times that I need that extra reach. Now, I took this lens out to my favorite park, the Riparian Preserve in Gilbert, Arizona, and I wanted to see just how much of a reach I could get out of this lens. So first, here's the lens at 70mm on my Sony a7 IV. But the a7 IV also has crop mode available for video, so I was able to push into 300mm. Very impressive. But then I added the 2x converter, and the reach then became 600mm out of this 200mm lens. That's incredible, especially compared to where we started. So this lens allowed me to get these shots I could have never gotten without a telephoto lens. Now here I'm using active stabilization in the camera, but this lens also has internal stabilization, and they work together to make a very smooth result. This is also helped by shooting at 60 frames a second and putting it on a 24-frame timeline. So even though this lens only opens up to f4, it can still blur out the background, or in this case, the foreground, quite easily. So being limited to f4 is not much of a limitation, at least for me. Now the slow motion would have been better on my a7S III, but it doesn't have the ability to crop in. So I can imagine that this lens will always go on my a7 IV for that very reason. Alright, you gotta love that. But if that extra step of light is very important to you, well then you can pay an additional $1,100 for the 70-200 G Master 2 lens. But the reason that I went for this lens over the more expensive G Master lens was because this lens has a feature that that lens does not. This can do macro. Okay, albeit not a full macro, a half macro, or macro light if you'd like. But still, it can get really close. Here, let me show you. I took it in my backyard, took some of these pictures, and look, this does a fantastic job. This is a super fun lens. Until now, I've relied on this Sony 90mm macro lens for all of my macro work. It's a fantastic lens, but it costs about $1,000. But now let's see how this new lens stacks up against my old macro lens. So with my 90mm macro lens and this ruler, let's see how close we can get. Well, we can get in, oh yeah, really nice and close. Alright, and now with the 70mm, let's move that into about 90mm. You can see that the 90mm can get much closer than the 70-200mm. Now when you add the 2x teleconverter, it actually becomes a 1-to-1 macro. This is fantastic. Okay, with the 2x teleconverter, we did lose half of our light, but look at that. So we can see that with the teleconverter, this lens can completely replace my 90mm macro. Of course, the 90mm is going to open up to 2.8, and this is going to be stopped down to f8. But still, outside in bright sunlight, that's not going to be a problem. The problem with it is it's kind of expensive. It's $550. I rented this one to see if I'd like it, but I figured out that I could rent it 27 days, and I would still have money left over. Of course, the problem with renting is there comes a time when you have to return it, which is right now, and so I'm going to have to finish the review without having it anymore. But the sheer act of returning a lens and being without it for a while will let you know whether it's something you really wanted. So in the weeks and months to come, will I miss this? Well, we'll find out. And if I miss it enough, I will buy one. Now, before I give you my third reason as to why I purchased this lens, I'm going to go over a few of the other perks that this lens has, and 2 of the cons that I've chosen to ignore. Let's start with focus breathing. This lens is fantastic. Its focus breathing is very, very minimal. And if you're shooting with a newer Sony lens that has focus breathing compensation, well, look at this. It's completely eliminated. Yeah, this lens is on the list of expensive lenses that get focus breathing compensation. Good one, Sony. Oh, but bad one, Sony. You have not updated the a7S III with focus breathing compensation. My most popular video today explains why Sony has abandoned the a7S series. You can watch it now, or you can just wait at the end. I will remind you, because trust me, you're going to want to watch that video. Okay, back to the perks. It has a lot of buttons on the side, including 3 modes for stabilization. Mode 1 for standard stabilization, Mode 2 if you're going to do a lot of panning, and Mode 3 for sports photography. I don't really know what it does for sports photography, but if I ever do sports photography, I'm switching on that button right there. It also has this DMF switch, and this is really great for macro photography, because when switched on, you can press the shutter button halfway and focus, but then still use the manual focus to move it ever so slightly one way or the other. This makes macro photography way easier. Oh, and this switch is really helpful because it allows you to tell the camera and lens what you're trying to take a picture of. Are you doing macro? Well, switch it to macro and it won't try to focus far away. Switch it to 3 meters and infinity and it's not going to try to do macro. Or you can just put it in the full setting and try your luck. And lastly, there's a switch to turn off autofocus. And it also has this little lock button here that allows you to lock it so that you can't zoom it in and out. See, I'll do that. Oh, yeah, not going to do it. This is important because over time, this doesn't creep down like that, but I think if I shook it, yeah, see that? Okay, I probably shouldn't be shaking my lens. Sorry about that. Now I'm happy to report this is a very, very sharp lens, and I'm told that it's much sharper than the previous version of this f4 lens, and it's almost as sharp as the 2.8 lens. In fact, it is as sharp in the middle, but not quite as much on the edges, which doesn't bother me at all. Now, I got that information from Tony and Chelsea Northrup. You can watch their video. I'll put a link down in the description because who's going to buy this lens without checking out some other videos? And that's a good video to watch. And now for my 2 disappointments. First, it's not a parfocal lens, which I get that. I didn't really expect it to be, but I did think it could do this trick that my 35mm can do, and that is because it has these XD linear motors, well, I can put a little piece of tape here and I can get into focus, and if I don't go too far afield where it starts to spin and spin and spin, I can pull it right back and pull focus with this 35mm G Master. And I thought, oh, this has XD linear motors, it can do the same thing, but it can't. Well, that's probably because it's a zoom lens, and well, probably no zoom lens can do that. But still, I was a little disappointed. My next disappointment is something I know that they could take care of, and that is there is no declickable aperture ring. In fact, there's no aperture ring at all. And that's a feature that I've come to love on most of my other Sony lenses. A lot of G lenses like this have that declickable aperture ring, because a declickable aperture ring just makes life so much easier, especially for run and gun filmmaking when the light is changing all around you. But I guess I'm gonna have to move my finger up and put it on the little dial and turn it that way. Okay, I'm over it. Okay, now for my 3rd reason for buying this lens. This takes fantastic portraits. Now, I know that's not for filmmakers, but let's face it, all filmmakers have a little photographer in them somewhere. I certainly do, and I've certainly enjoyed taking photographs like this. Now, the last time I had a telephoto lens was in my Canon system, and I was able to take these shots of a surf competition in Oceanside. And yeah, that's Brittany Hamilton, who lost her arm to a shark in Hawaii. Of course, as a photographer, I also enjoy wide-angle lenses as well as medium lenses. In fact, there isn't a lens that I don't love as a photographer. But there's something very special about this range for portraits. It's hard to take a bad portrait in this focal range. So it's great that Sony has a lens that can cover my macro needs, my telephoto needs, and those fantastic portrait needs. It's pretty much 3 lenses in one, and that's why I think it's worth it. Thank you, Sony. Oh, but I almost forgot that I'm very mad at Sony, and I made an entire video about how Sony is abandoning my camera, the A7S series. And so you can just watch that right over there, and maybe you can get mad with me. Although, I really do like this lens, and this is a great system. But I'm still very mad, so just watch that right over there.